Many of us got to know him first as one of the journalists who broke the Watergate story. Remember that? He's a living part of our nation's history, a transformational figure in how journalists interact with our government, and an individual who inspired many into the challenging but rewarding field of investigative journalism. Since the nation was introduced to him in the 1970s, Bob Woodward has become an acclaimed chronicler of presidential history as the author of books on the last 8 presidents. And I understand he's working on a 9th, which perhaps he will preview with us during this meeting. As 2017 draws to a close, we hope his remarks will help us take stock of what the political changes and currents in Washington mean to the issues that we work on at the Academy and read about every day. We look forward to hearing his perspective on the important issues of our time. We'll take questions after his remarks, but please now help me welcome to the stage Mr. Bob Woodward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. We're going to talk about Mr. Trump a great deal. I was giving a talk yesterday, and the theme for another conference here in Washington was the age of disruption. And I said I am going to talk about the disruptor in chief. And whether you like him or don't like him, this is a pivot point in history for this country. It is one of those moments you will look back on in your own life and say, ask questions, what was going on, and what did it mean? Last year, a young reporter at the Post, Bob Costa, and I interviewed Trump, and it was just as he was on the verge of gaining the Republican nomination. And I want to read a little bit from the transcript, and then we'll go to this a little more. During about an hour into the interview, Corey Lewandowski, who was Trump's campaign manager at that moment, came and just stood up and went over to Trump and interrupted him and said, we have a meeting downtown that we need to go to, some important Republicans. Trump, you know what? We can delay that meeting for 20 minutes. Lewandowski, I know, but it's very important, and it's critical that we be respectful of these people. Trump, could you call him up and say we will delay for half an hour? Lewandowski, I can, but we promised these guys. Trump, do me a favor, call them back, tell them we'll be 45 minutes late. This is Trump. He wants to do things, and if somebody resists or pushes back, he advances the ball as he sees it. You people are serious people. That's evident from listening to the 2 talks, and you were entitled to a serious discussion. The best I can give you my sense of where the presidency is and where the country is to a certain extent. One of the factors in the American presidency that I think is overlooked now is the concentration of power. Presidents have more and more power. As I've worked on books and articles for the Washington Post, from Nixon to up through Obama, more and more power accrues to the president. As you know, in the Constitution, The president is the executive branch. It's not the cabinet, it's not the National Security Council, it's not the White House staff. The president has that power. How many of you remember back to 1978 when Jimmy Carter was president? Raise your, oh good, we've got a lot of people from my age group. One of the things Carter did in '78, he invited Menachem Begin, the Israeli prime minister, and Anwar Sadat, the Egyptian president, to Washington. They went to Camp David for 2 weeks and came up with the Camp David Accords, a really significant advance in the Middle East. Obviously did not solve all of the problems. But I was amazed Carter pulled this off, and I remember asking Hamilton Jordan, who was Carter's chief of staff. Hamilton Jordan was obviously a Carter loyalist, but he was a Carter realist. And I said, Hamilton, how did Carter pull this off? And he said, look, if you'd been locked away at Camp David for 13 days with Jimmy Carter, you two would have signed anything. There is an abundance of truth in that, but also what's important to remember is the agenda-setting power a president has. The president can, as Carter did, said, we're going to focus on this. If you see Trump, I'm going to Asia, we're going to do health care, we're going to do tax reform. Presidents set the agenda. Also, presidents, as commander-in-chief, can employ the military force as they want. It is totally in their hands. And people don't, well, now wait a minute. I remember talking to a group of academics during the presidency of George W. Bush and trying to make this point. And they said, no, the Constitution's very clear that Congress will declare war. And I said, yeah, but that's not the way it works. The last declared war was World War II, and I think we've had some wars since then. And they would not hear of it. And I said, look, the President George W. Bush can invade Mexico tomorrow if he wants. And somebody stood up in the back in agony and said, don't give him any ideas. He has that power. I mentioned to your leaders that I was going to take a poll, and I want to take a poll about how, and I have no illusions that this is a representative group of America, but and the question is who you voted for, but there are 5 categories, and I'll summarize them, and then you can pick. You voted for Hillary, you voted for Trump, you voted against Hillary, you voted against Trump, or you don't want to say. So how many voted for Hillary? Please raise your hands. A lot? How many voted for Trump? A few, all in the back. Police escorts are available afterwards. Who voted against Hillary? Oh, quite a few. How many voted against Trump? Okay. How many don't want to say? And then there's actually another category, more sophisticated poll taking. How many don't want to say that they don't want to say? See, no one will even admit that. Having done reporting for 45 years, I really don't have a political dog in the fight. Don't look at this as through a political lens, though obviously many people do. Like you, I'm trying to find out what the facts are to be as rigorously empirical as possible and bleach out the bias as much as can be done. And there are a couple of things that I've summarize about presidents, and that is one of the common themes is, which is not written about much, and that is the huge, unimaginable impact of winning the presidency on a human being. It is a self-validation that probably very few, if anybody else, gets. And there is interwoven, I found this in Nixon through Obama, a sense they have of personal destiny, that every step of their life, in a way, was moving toward this office of president, that even things that were setbacks were also necessary. There is a pride, an intense pride in winning the presidency, a sense all presidents have of "I know best." And in that environment, you find that all presidents, at least I've discovered one way or another, sometimes in a very large way, they bend and disfigure reality so much that losing can become winning. The other element common in the presidency is the disease of isolation. Presidents get isolated. You talk to them, and I've interviewed so many of them, and they say, "Oh, I want people who will come in and speak truth to power." It doesn't happen very often. George Kennan, the father of the containment philosophy containing the Soviet Union, adopted by Republican and Democratic presidents, called this the treacherous curtain of deference that comes down. Somebody comes into the Oval Office. When I go to the Oval Office to interview presidents, as I've done many times, I have questions, and I'm not trying to be an advocate for anything. I want to hear what they have to say, but people who come in as advocates of this Oval Office dust descends, and presidents don't get the truth. Now, I don't know, in the actuarial business, you have a process like they do in the CIA. CIA, after something happens that is a real surprise, like 1979 Iranian Revolution, the collapse of the Soviet Union, or just this year, the sudden leap forward by North Korea in developing a hydrogen bomb and intercontinental ballistic missiles that can, not just theoretically, but in fact could reach the United States. This was a big surprise. Just months ago, people who know as much about the intelligence world as possible were telling me, "Oh no, it's at least a year off." It is now, in fact. We have this. So in the CIA, they'll walk the cat back, and they'll say, "Okay, now this surprise happened. If we look at all of our intelligence, and we now know the outcome, when could we have seen it earlier? When could we have seen it first? And what did we miss?" I want to look at Trump this way. And that interview Bob Costa and I did last year, I want to go through a little bit, because it was an interview designed not to find out what Trump thought of Ted Cruz or Hillary Clinton. It was designed to discover as much as we could what's inside, what's driving him. And I have a little technique of taking this finger and sticking it over my little finger and jamming it into the fingernail so it hurts. And it is a reminder to me, it's like a string around the finger, and it tells me to shut the fuck up. Thank you. And listen, what do you learn that I'm sure you learn in your business? The power of silence. You have let the silence suck out the truth. Just sit there. Now, with Trump this day, you don't have to endure much pain. He wants to talk. And here are some of the things he said, all on his own. He said, winning solves lots of problems. One of the problems I have is that when I hit people, I hit them harder, maybe, than is necessary. Then he said, Jack Nicklaus, the golfing legend, a friend of his, called him up and said, and this is Trump's rendition on the tape, Jack called me up and said, quote, "Hey, Donald, could you do us all a favor? We love you. Don't kill everyone because you may need them on the way back." I noted to Trump, I said, you know, in doing this for decades, all successful politics is about coalition building. You have to build coalitions. Jack Nicklaus is right. You're going to need people on the way back. Trump said, it's true, it's true. And if you listen, if I had the tape here and I play, he sounded like a teenager because he said, totally, totally. And he said, I have to win before I can do that, coalition build. And then he said, I understand how life works. I am the Lone Ranger. Just 3 or 4 weeks ago, an analysis on the front page of the New York Times was built around that whole concept in that quote that Trump gave us about he sees himself as the Lone Ranger. Then he said, I bring out rage in people, I always have. He said his daughter, Tiffany, young daughter, 23 at the time, said to him, hey, Daddy, you're running for president. Be presidential. So Trump says, this is what he told Tiffany. I said to Tiffany, after I win, I will be so presidential that you won't even recognize me. You'll be falling asleep. You'll be so bored. We're still waiting for that moment, obviously. Then we got into the discussion that's at the center of politics, and that is power. What is power? How do you use it? How does it get used against you? And we quoted some things President Obama had said about power, and one of them, just recently, this last year, last spring, Obama had said, real power is not having to use violence. So then Trump responded to this, and I wish there were a video of it because it was almost Shakespearean. It was like Hamlet or Iago turning to the audience in an aside because he kind of whispers and he says, real power is, I don't even want to use the word, but real power is fear. And if you look at his career, you look at what he did in the campaign, you look at what he's done this first 10 months, 11 months as president, he deploys fear. He scares people he does it, but to a certain extent, it is a mode of operating. Now, we ran the transcript. We did a story about this. We missed the lead. Often in journalism, you always say, what's the lead? What's the main point? And it should have been this, what he said about real power being feared, but it wasn't. It's in there. And the story was a big deal for 2 hours. Like everything in Trump world, it lasts about that long, and then something else takes its place. So I thought we had got close to some truths about him. And I took the transcript and sent it to a good friend of mine who's one of the nation's most renowned psychiatrists and said, I'd like to hear what you think. And he said, look, you know, we have a rule in psychiatry, we can't give a diagnosis unless we've met somebody and treated him. And I said, no, read it. And, you know, you've been looking at stuff about Trump. And so my friend, the psychiatrist, called me back and said, okay, I'm going to give you my diagnosis, but if you ever tell anyone who I am, I will kill you. So had my attention. And I said, what do you think? And he said, it is the classic case of a narcissistic personality disorder. Now, this was last year. People have now picked up on this. A self-focus, a need for adoration, the characteristics of Trump. But then my friend said, you know, you could argue that all politicians have some sort of a narcissistic personality disorder. He said you could argue that Hillary Clinton has this. To go into politics is to put yourself in the center stage. I said, okay, what does this mean in the practical world? He said, as best he can recall, over decades of practice, he can recall 8 people he diagnosed with a narcissistic personality disorder. He said, in 4 of the cases, I treated them for years. I poured my soul out like I never have. And at the end, I did not move the needle on their behavior one bit. I said, well, what about the other 4 cases? And he said, the other 4 cases. I worked for years, all kinds of treatment, analysis, medication, psychotherapy, and I can't tell you how I really devoted myself to these people. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, after the years of work, they moved the needle on my behavior. That's what's happened to this country. Trump has moved the needle, the world has moved the needle on everyone's behavior. And whether you know, however you look at it, it is a shock. And when you have the shock, when you have the personality who will do things, and the power of the presidency, it is a mix where you can't really figure out what the future is or the outcomes. You know, one of the biggest problems in the presidency, in the White House, all the way for me, back to Nixon, and this is true of Trump, and that is the absence of strategic thinking. In your business, you know strategic then is
you're willing to cut $400 billion. He wants $600 billion, and he's proposed a compromise right in the middle. And you said no, because I knew you said no. And he said yes. I said no. And I said why? And he said the experts told me that if we cut that much, we would start taking money away, not from just doctors and hospitals, but from beneficiaries. And somebody's nodding here. I think that's true. But what do you know, this is a good news. We're going to cut Medicare. I have bad news. It's more than you thought was necessary. And so I asked Obama, I said, Mr. President, how come you said no? And he repeated, oh, the experts. And I said, but what about entitlement growth? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. You know how much of the budget it takes up in the federal government now? A lot. Close to 70% of the federal budget are these transfer payments, and it's heading up. And so here Obama said to me, oh, you know, not cutting entitlements is untenable. So we have the President of the United States saying to not cut entitlements is untenable. On the record, it's in the book. How much did Obama cut entitlements? 0. No entitlement cuts because it was politically painful. Now, how many of you have been involved in a negotiation at one time or another in your life? Please raise your hands. How many of you are married? It's the same question. And what do you learn in a negotiation or marriage? Gets down to, it's simple, the formula. One for you, one for me, one for you, one for me. And the negotiations, I think number one problem is North Korea. I think we're going to have to negotiate. If you, when the full history of this comes out, you will find that Trump, all the public tweets and statements about Kim Jong-un, fire and fury, we're going to destroy you, we're going to let you have this capacity to hit us with an ICBM that has a nuclear weapon on top. And then the other day, President Trump said, oh, I think Kim Jong-un should come to the negotiating table. What happened in the White House, Trump was saying all of these tough things, and people were saying, oh, you got to be careful. Kim Jong-un is temperamental. We don't know what he's going to do. He's 33 years old. He's had very little experience, but more than you, Mr. President. And Trump said, no, I've got to be tough. And then he's tough. And Kim Jong-un comes and says, I'm willing to meet and negotiate. And Trump says, see, fear works. So we can get to questions. I just want to talk a little bit about the media, because I think the context, you were asking about the context, is the media, the impatience and speed of the internet that drives so much. We have obviously media that is polarized. The tone, I believe, goes off the rails sometimes both ways. I think it is not useful, and that I'm not going to embarrass myself and say, no, let me embarrass myself. That's my job. How many people basically trust what you read in the news media? Raise your hands. Oh, there's somebody with two hands up. Are you an editor at the Washington Post? How many people basically don't trust the news media? Okay, fewer, more do. Good. That's unusual. Polling of the general population shows about 2/3 of the people don't trust the news media. We have a big problem. The road to credibility is going to take a long time. And the thing that we need in the news media, it's the thing you always have to find in your business when you're successful. You need two things, stamina and vigilance. And when you reduce everything to a soundbite, it doesn't work. We don't get, I talked to a reporter some months ago, not at the Post, thank God. I said, when you go out for an interview, and he said, oh, I never go out for an interview. I do it on the internet, or sometimes the staggering intimacy of the telephone. Now, you know in your business, you're working on something, you have to look the people in the eye. You have to get to know them. I have to confess, I have not gone out for interviews enough, particularly when people didn't want to talk. I remember doing the fourth Bush book. There was a general who would not talk. I sent emails, phone messages, intermediaries, radio. He wasn't going to talk. So I found out where he lived in the Washington area and decided I would go see him, knock on his door without an appointment. Now, when is the best time to go see a 4-star general when you don't have an appointment? You look like a general. When would be the best time? After dinner, exactly. 8:15 on a Tuesday. If you don't want to go on a Monday, you don't want to go on the end of the week, 8:15, you will have had dinner, maybe had a few pops, and so I go, knock on the door. He opens the door, looked at me, I'm going to quote him directly, and he said, "Are you still doing this shit?" So, I did this. You've never seen such a pure poker face. If you saw me, you would think, is it possible to stand and be in hibernation? Because I'm nothing. I'm not giving him anything. Let that silence suck out the truth. And he looked at me, and 2 seconds, and then he got a disappointed look on his face, and then 4 seconds, he finally, come on in. Sat for 2 hours and answered most, not in honest, not all the questions, but most of them. Now, why did he do that? Because somebody showed up. We are not showing up. We have to get out of the bubble we live in. Now, how does all this end? Because Trump will, at some point, not be president. If he serves 2 terms, it will end then. And the Constitution is really resilient and strong, but it's also fragile. I think you have to ask, this is a test. Don't think it's just politics as usual or the way it's been in other presidents. This is different. And can we survive the test? It is political gridlock. It is the bitter ideological divide. It is divisions within the Republican Party like I've never really seen before. Divisions within the Democratic Party. A sometimes emotionally unhinged media on both sides. And how does this come to equilibrium? Answer, don't know. Have no idea. But one thing I'm pretty sure of, that this moment is the final exam for our democracy. Thank you very much. We have some time for questions.